I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even cry. Not that night anyway. I just sat in my car in the driveway of my own home, in the dark, in February, watching the light in the upstairs bedroom window like a stranger who had gotten the wrong address. The temperature outside was -17. I had my coat, I had half a tank of gas, and I had absolutely no idea what I was going to do next. Let me back up. My name is Eleanor, and I am 63 years old. I spent 31 years teaching high school English in Guelph, Ontario. The same school, same hallways, same smell of old textbooks and floor wax. I retired 4 years ago, and I won't lie to you, I cried on my last day, not because I was sad to leave, because that building, those kids, that work, it was the thread that kept everything together after my husband Raymond passed away. Raymond died 11 years ago. Heart attack sudden on a Tuesday morning in October. He was 55 years old. He was making toast. After he was gone, I did what women of a certain generation do. I kept going. I kept the house clean. I kept the lawn. I kept the lawn. I kept showing up. Raymond and I had one child, our son, who was 34 when all of this happened. I'll call him by what I've always called him, my son, because that's what he is, first and foremost. Whatever else happened, whatever I had to do in the end, he is still my son. He married his wife. I'll call her my daughter-in-law 6 years ago. It was a small wedding out near Elora. She wore her grandmother's earrings and she cried during the vows, and I thought, good, she loves him. That's enough. That's ethic. I want to be fair about her because I think fairness matters, even when it's hard. She wasn't always unkind. In the beginning, she was warm with me, curious. She asked about Raymond. She looked at the photos on the wall and wanted to know the stories behind them. She laughed easily. She made my son happy in a way I hadn't seen in years. But something shifted. I can't point to exactly when. It was gradual, the way erosion is gradual. You don't notice until the edge of the cliff is much closer than you thought. They had been living in a rented apartment in Hamilton. My son worked in logistics, decent salary, not extravagant. My daughter-in-law had been doing bookkeeping for a small construction company. Then the company folded. Then their rent went up. And I mean really up, the kind of increase that makes you sit down. Hamilton had gotten expensive. Everything had gotten expensive. Haything had gotten expensive. My son called me in late September. He said, "Mom, we're in a bit of a spot." He's always done that. Downplayed things, kept his voice steady, tried not to worry me. I asked him what he meant by a spot. He said they were looking at their options. He said they were wondering, and here he paused. He was wondering if they could stay with me for a while. Just until they got back on their feet. 3 months, maybe 4. I live in a 3-bedroom house on a quiet street in Guelph. Raymond and I bought it in 1989 for a number that sounds laughable now. I own it outright. It is mine, paid for, with a deed that has my name on it, and only my name, because Raymond put it in my name alone years ago for estate reasons. My son knew that. My daughter-in-law, I assumed, knew that too. I said yes. Of course I said yes. He's my son. They arrived on a Saturday in early October with 2 cars loaded full, a rented cargo trailer, and the dog I hadn't been told about. A big dog. A Labrador mix named something I couldn't pronounce, so I just called him Fella. He was sweet. He knocked over my hallway table on the first day and wagged his tail about it, completely unrepentant, and I laughed. I thought, this will be fine. This will be an adventure. And for a while, it was. My son cooked on Sunday mornings, real breakfasts, eggs and back bacon, and the kind of strong coffee Raymond used to make. My daughter-in-law brought home butter tarts from the bakery on Gordon Street and left them on the counter without saying anything, which I came to understand was her way of saying thank you. We watched television together in the evenings. The dog eventually stopped knocking things over. It was somewhere around the 6-week mark that things began to change. It started small. My daughter-in-law began rearranging things in the kitchen, the way the cupboards were organized, where I kept the baking sheets, the position of the spice rack. She didn't ask. She just did it. And when I mentioned it, she said, "Oh, I hope you don't mind. It just makes more sense this way." I said I didn't mind. I told myself I didn't mind. Then she started working from home. Her new employer, she had found a remote bookkeeping position fairly quickly, I'll give her that, required a dedicated workspace. Could she use the third bedroom? I said of course. I had been using it as a reading room, but I moved my chair and my books into the living room. Fine. Temporary. 3 months, maybe 4. The third bedroom became her office. She put a lock on the door, a little push-button thing from the hardware store. She said it was so the dog couldn't get in and disturb her during calls. That made sense. I didn't think much of it. Then one afternoon I came home from grocery shopping and found that Raymond's chair had been moved. I know that sounds like a small thing. It probably sounds petty to say it out loud, but Raymond's chair, a big, worn, brown leather armchair that he bought at an estate sale in Fergus the year we got married, had sat in the same corner of the living room for 34 years. I sat in it on the evenings when I missed him most. My son used to do his homework in it. It smelled faintly, still, of Raymond's aftershave, which is something I know is probably in my imagination, but which I could not and did not want to shake. It had been pushed to the side of the room, angled against the wall, and in its place was a new accent chair my daughter-in-law had ordered online. Modern gray fabric, very clean lines. She came into the living room while I was standing there looking at it, and she said, "I hope it's okay. The armchair was blocking the natural light. I think the new one really opens up the space." I said, "That chair belonged to my husband." She said, "Oh, it's not gone. It's just there by the window." I said, "I'd like it put back." And she did put it back. But the way she did it, the small exhale, the tight smile, the way my son would not quite meet my eyes at dinner that night, told me something had shifted. Something had been tested. Over the next few weeks, she started making other small changes. She repotted my kitchen herbs and put them in different windowsills, saying the light was better. She started leaving mail on the kitchen table open, including mine, which she said she'd opened by accident. She began making comments at dinner about the neighborhood, that the house across the street had sold for how much. Can you believe it? She mentioned, once, that a financial planner friend of hers had said that seniors in big houses were sitting on their most valuable asset. I heard that sentence, and I set down my fork, and I looked at my son, and he was looking at his plate. I want to be very honest with you here. I am not a dramatic person. I do not catastrophize. I have been through loss that would break some people, and I am still here, and I am still steady. But I heard that sentence, and something in my chest went quiet and still in a way that frightened me. I started paying closer attention. She had begun to take photographs of the rooms. I caught her doing it twice. Once in the master bedroom, which was my room, and once in the basement, where Raymond's workshop still was. When I asked what the photos were for, she said she was just documenting things for insurance purposes. I nodded and said nothing. I went to my bedroom that night, and I found a small notepad in my nightstand. Raymond's notepad, the one he used to write hardware store lists on. And I wrote down every single thing that had happened, every rearrangement, every comment. The photographs, the open mail, the chair. I dated them all. I have been a teacher for 31 years. I know what documentation is for. In late January, I had a routine appointment at Guelph General. Just a follow-up, nothing serious. I told my daughter-in-law I'd be back by 3. My appointment ran long, and then I stopped at the Zers on Stone Road, and by the time I pulled into the driveway, it was nearly 5. I put my key in the front door. It didn't turn. I tried again. I stepped back and looked at the lock. It was new, a different lock, brushed nickel where my old brass deadbolt had been. I stood there on my own front step in the February cold, and I thought, I must be making a mistake. I went around to the side door, new lock there too. The back door, new lock there too. The back door, new lock. I sat in my car. I called my son's cell phone. He answered on the second ring. He sounded, and this is the part I keep turning over even now, he sounded like he had been waiting for the call. I said, I can't get into the house. He said, Mom, there's something we need to talk about. I said, I need you to come let me in. He said, she thought it would be better if we had a conversation first. I said, whose house is this? He didn't answer that. I said his name. I said it the way I used to when he was a boy and I needed him to look at me. He was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, Mom, you have a lot of space and we're kind of crammed. And she just thought, and I stopped listening. I hung up. I sat in my car in my own driveway in the February dark with the heat running on low to save the gas. And here's the thing I want to explain to anyone who has ever asked why I didn't call the police right then. I know what that would have looked like. My son would have come to the door. He would have explained to the officers that there had been a miscommunication, that his mother was upset, that it was a family matter. She would have been calm and reasonable. I know her. She would have been very, very calm and reasonable. And I would have been the elderly woman who couldn't understand what was happening in her own home. I have been a teacher for 31 years. I also know strategy. I called my friend Meredith, who has been my closest friend since our boys were in kindergarten together. She said, you come here right now. I said, not yet. She said, Eleanor? I said, not yet. I need one night to think. So I sat there. I didn't bang on the door. I didn't make a scene. I turned the heat up just enough to keep my fingers from going stiff, and I sat and I thought until I was completely sure. Because here is the thing about someone who changes the locks on your house, they have made their position very clear. And when someone makes their position that clear, the worst thing you can do is react before you are ready. The advantage goes to the one who stays calm the longest. I have been staying calm since I was 48 years old, and a man in a hospital hallway told me my husband's heart had stopped. The next morning, I drove to my bank, TD, on Woolwich Street, and I arrived when they opened at 9:30. I spoke to the branch manager, a very competent woman named, well, I won't give her name, but she was kind and thorough. I asked to review everything on my accounts. I found that my son's name had been added to my checking account 14 months ago. I had agreed to that at the time for practical reasons in case something happened to me. I removed his access that morning. I also removed him from the emergency contact listed with my financial advisor. I didn't leave a note. I didn't table with a cup of tea that... Then I drove to a locksmith on Edinburgh Road. I asked for 3 new deadbolts, front, side, and back, and a smart lock for the side door that I could open from my phone. He said he could do it that afternoon. I said that worked. Then I drove to the Guelph Public Library because I needed Wi-Fi and I needed to think clearly, and I called a real estate lawyer I had used before when Raymond's estate was settled. I explained the situation. She told me what I already knew. The house was mine, solely mine. And what my daughter-in-law had done was, at minimum, mischief, and potentially more than that. She said I had options. I said I know. I said I just wanted it confirmed in a professional's voice. Then I drove back to my house. The locksmith was already there, which I had asked him to be. I had called ahead. My daughter-in-law's car was in the driveway. I knocked on the door, which felt absurd, and when she answered, I said, "I need you and my son to please give me access to my home." She said, "We should all sit down and have a conversation about," I said, "I am not here for a conversation. This is my home. I have the deed in my name. You changed the locks without my knowledge or consent. I have spoken to a lawyer this morning and I have a locksmith here now. I need you to step aside." My son appeared behind her. He looked, I don't know how to describe it exactly, like a man who has been standing behind a door for a long time and doesn't know if he's brave enough to open it. I looked at him. I said, "I love you. I have never once stopped loving you, but I need you to understand that this is not negotiable." The locksmith changed all 3 locks that afternoon. I stood in the hallway while he worked. I gave my son until the end of the week. 6 days. I said I would have their things ready for them, boxed and organized, and I would leave the boxes in the entrance hall for them to collect at a time that worked. I said I would pack carefully and with respect. I said I would not throw anything away or damage anything. I said I wanted the dog to be okay. She said something about tenant rights. I said, "You are not a tenant. A tenant has a lease. A tenant pays rent." There was never a lease and there was never rent, and we can speak to a lawyer together about that if you would like, or you can accept the 6 days. She left the room. My son stood in the hallway for a long moment. Then he said, "Mom, I'm sorry." I said, "I know you are." He said, "I don't know how it got here." I said, "I don't know how it got here." I said, "I do. But that's a conversation for another time." I spent that week packing carefully, the way I said I would. I wrapped the breakable things. I labeled the boxes in clear marker. I folded her clothes with the same precision I'd used for 30 years folding linen in this house. I kept the dog's bed and food bowl in the kitchen until the last morning and gave him an extra biscuit before I put it all in the front hall. On Saturday morning, I stacked everything neatly on the porch rather than the lawn because it was still February and I am not a woman who leaves things out in the cold unnecessarily. They came with a van that afternoon. She did not look at me. My son did, at the end. After the last box was loaded, he stood by the van door and he looked back at the house and then at me on the step, and I nodded at him once. He nodded back. He got in the van. I went inside and I locked the door, my new lock, my key. I made myself a pot of red rose tea and I sat in Raymond's chair and I watched the street light come on outside the living room window, the way it always did in the winter, early, before 4 o'clock. The dog was gone. The house was quiet. It smelled like my house again. I will tell you something I have told very few people. That night, after the tea, I did cry. I cried for a long time, for my son, for the distance that had opened between us, for Raymond, for the strange particular grief of protecting something that should never have needed protecting. I cried the way you cry when you have held yourself together just long enough to get through the thing that needed doing. And then I washed my face, and I changed the wallpaper on my phone to a photo of Raymond and me at Long Point Provincial Park, 1991. Both of us squinting into the sun, both of us laughing at something neither of us can remember now. My son called me 2 weeks later, not her, him. He called from a new number from an apartment he'd found in Kitchener. He said he was sorry. He said he had been weak when he should have been clear. He said he didn't know if I would ever forgive him. I said, "You are my son. Forgiveness is not the question. We meet for lunch now on the last Sunday of the month at a diner on Wyndham Street. He comes alone. We talk about small things mostly. The news, his job, a book I'd been reading. Sometimes he asks about the house. I tell him it's fine. I tell him the neighbor finally fixed his fence and the crabapple tree is going to need trimming in the spring. We are finding our way back, the way you do, slowly, in the particular cold of something that has broken and is being put carefully back together. The house is still mine. The deed still has my name on it. Raymond's chair is in its corner, right where it belongs. I've thought about that February night many times since. Sitting in my own driveway, key that no longer worked, heat on low, watching the light in my upstairs window. There was a moment, somewhere around the second hour, when I almost got out of the car and knocked. Not because I thought it would work, but because that's what you do when you're tired and cold and you just want it to be over. I didn't knock, and I've never been sorry about that. What I've come to understand, not from any book, not from anything anyone told me, but from living through it, is that how you respond to being wronged matters as much as the wrong itself. Maybe more. My daughter-in-law changed those locks believing that confusion and cold would make me compliant. She had mistaken my patience for weakness. A lot of people do. I think patience in older women especially gets read as resignation. It isn't. It never was. There is something I want to say about my son because I think it's the part that doesn't get talked about enough in stories like mine. He wasn't a villain. He was a man who had slowly, incrementally handed over his own judgment to someone else, and by the time he realized what had been built in that process, he was standing in a hallway, not able to look at his mother. The choices that led to that moment didn't happen in one dramatic scene. They happened in small surrenders over months, one decision at a time, each one seeming minor, each one making the next one easier. That's how the things that shouldn't happen do happen. Not in explosions, in increments. What I had that she didn't count on was that I had spent 31 years teaching young people to think clearly under pressure, to gather evidence before drawing conclusions, to know the difference between reacting and responding. Those weren't skills I learned in a classroom. They were things I had built over a lifetime of showing up, staying honest, and doing the hard thing even when the easier thing was right there. When I walked into that bank on Woolwich Street at 9:30 in the morning, I wasn't running on anger. I was running on clarity. I knew exactly what I needed to do and exactly in what order, and I did it without drama because drama would have cost me time, and time was the one thing I couldn't afford to waste. I packed her belongings carefully. I want people to understand that. I folded her clothes. I wrapped the breakable things. I labeled every box. Not because she deserved my care in that moment, but because I am not the kind of woman who damages things in anger. I have worked too long and too hard to become who I am to let one bad situation strip that from me. The house is still mine. My son and I are finding our way back to each other. Slowly, the way you do when something real has broken and you are both willing to keep showing up anyway. That willingness, his and mine both, is what I hold on to. Raymond used to say that the most important question you can ask yourself in a hard moment is not, "What do I feel?" but "What do I know?" I know this house is mine. I know my son loves me. I know that I handled myself with as much integrity as I was capable of. And I know that when I sat back down in that armchair with my cup of tea, the quiet in that house was the best thing I had felt in months. Some things you only get back by being willing to stand in the cold long enough to be sure you're right.